Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here at Chomple Reads, and in this video, we're going to be trying to do something a little bit different that I've not done before. Mainly because I got to use like the screenshot, like my computer screen and stuff as we do it. Just because I am not getting out all the books I read in 2018. But if you haven't guessed from the title, we're going to try and cover every single book I read in 2018 and try and do like a quick 3 or 4 or 5 second lightning review for each book that I read in 2018, and this is kind of see which books kind of stuck with me and which books basically I've already completely just totally forgot about. But anyways, I hope you enjoy it. It's going to be a little bit different for me, so hopefully I can get everything set up, and I'll just see you in a few seconds. Alright, I think I got everything set up properly with the microphone and the screen recording software, I believe. I'm not quite sure why the mouse is blinking like that. It probably means something, but haven't figured that out yet. But anyways, let's just get started and see how it goes, because it's still probably going to take a little while, even if they're only 3 or 4 second reviews each. But yeah, let's just get started. And we're going to start with Black Sun Rising by C.S. Friedman. Really cool science fantasy, and one of the only trilogies that I finished this year, if that tells you anything. The Black Company by Glenn Cook. Really bleak, grim, dark, realistic mercenary fantasy. Grim Company, Luke Skull was kind of meh. I thought it was going to be like the Black Company. Not really. 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. Basically, things happen when lots of things happen. Basically, yeah, didn't really make any argument at all. Astrophysics for people in a hurry. It was okay, just not like that funny, and was almost like too short. Kings of the Wild was just kind of silly comedy, I guess. I'm not quite sure why it's so popular, but just wasn't for me. City of Light, City of Poison by Holly Tucker. Really good history on basically a really crazy murder, poison, assassination cabal, basically, in Louis XIV's reign. Cicero by Anthony Everett. Pretty good political biography. Definitely like Cicero a little bit more after reading that than beforehand. Sins of Empire by Brian McLennan. I believe the really good first start to a new trilogy, better than the Powder Mage trilogy. SPQR by Mary Beard. This is kind of a standard history of Rome. Really nothing special, nothing really bad about it either, just kind of bland in the middle. World Undone, the story of the Great War, 1914-1918, the best World War I book of the year by far, best single volume work that I know of on that topic. Liza Lochlamora, probably the best fantasy I read this year, best characterization by far. Viking Herseer had nothing to do with Viking Herseers, basically. It was more just, Viking warriors, pretty boring. The Ancient Olympics and the Naked Olympics are pretty similar. Read both of them pretty much at the same time. Go with either or. This one's more of like a standard work, and this one's kind of a little bit more popular, I guess. I don't know. Get Well Soon, History's Worst Plagues, and The Heroes Who Fought Them. Best snarky book of the year. Really good, humorous and non-fiction with lots of pop culture references. Greek Athletics and the Genesis of Sport. Basically, the Olympics came from our like old Stone Age ancestors or new Stone Age ancestors. Not really, as you can tell. The Mighty Dead, Why Homer Matters. Have no idea what this book was about. It was really well written, but it was kind of like over my head for the first half. It was just really fluffy, but had some good arguments towards the end. Death of Caesar was a really good, basically close examination of the assassination of Caesar. Animal Weapons, The Evolution of Battle was just kind of a fun, unique read on basically arms races in the animal kingdom. The Seawolves, History of the Vikings was just kind of a short overview of the Viking Age. Nothing like super spectacular, but nothing really lacking either. Meditations of Marcus Aurelius is just really good, really pithy, just go read it. Prisoners of Geography was a really good geopolitical book on basically boundaries and why things happen the way they happen or have happened. Pretty good overview. Celtic Twilight was just kind of a weird read for me because it was like, poems and like really weird Irish folk stories. Not really sure how to judge that one. Only the Stones Survive was a weird fantasy based on like the Tuatha De Danann, basically the last traditional folk people of Ireland before the coming of the Celts. Really kind of strange with cardboard characters. The first clash was a really good history of the battle at Marathon, where the Greeks fought, the Athenians fought the Persians, except that he basically argued that, you can sprint like a mile in full battle armor and keep formation, which is absurd. The Vikings, a history, just another literal standard work on the Vikings, just like the other one, pretty much, but a little bit longer. Lift, fitness culture, basically it's okay, but be wary of the CrossFit subliminal messages in the book. The Earth, a very short introduction. It was okay for someone who didn't know that much about the actual physical science of the Earth. How the Irish saved civilization, as you can see. Basically, the Irish did some cool stuff, except this other culture, the Byzantines, basically did the same thing and better. In Search of Ancient Ireland actually was kind of fun for a documentary reread, or not reread, but documentary companion book. Other Minds, The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Conscious was kind of a cool look at cephalopods and stuff. Didn't really argue anything about consciousness, though. Gladiators, History's Most Deadly Sport, is actually a really cool close-up look at gladiators with lots of really cool details if you're interested in that topic. The Greatest Knight, Remarkable Life of William Marshall, is a really, really good biography of William Marshall. Full of analysis and basically biographical stuff. The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt was a really long biography of Theodore Roosevelt, though I can definitely see why it won the Pulitzer Prize. Macedonian armies after Alexander. This is literally just Macedon, not like the Seleucid Empire or the Ptolemies or anything, like the Wars of the Diadochi, just Macedon. Cannibalism, a perfectly natural history without really that much cannibalism in the book. Collision of Empires, the most detailed account of 4 or 5 months of World War I that I've ever read. Only recommended to hardcore savage scholars, basically. Brief History of Vice was kind of just a fluff work, but it was kind of a fun short read about basically crazy stuff, including Fly Agric. The Thousand Names is really good Napoleonic fantasy. I'm really excited about that series. Assassin's Apprentice, I was really looking forward to Robin Hobb. It was kind of meh for me, just because Fitz is kind of mopey the whole book. The Anglo-Saxon Age is just kind of your really brief standard work on the Anglo-Saxons. Definitely better stuff out there. Conan the Rebel, basically you have Pirate Conan in this one. And then we got the Ancient Near East. Actually was a really good overview of basically the ancient Near East from Mesopotamia to, I believe, Persia. Just a really good, very short introduction. The Genius of Birds is actually pretty detailed and has a lot of scientific studies. Really in-depth if you're interested in basically bird brains. Riddlemaster of Head. This is kind of weird, abstract, vintage, kind of 70s fantasy I really enjoy. The Thing with Feathers I read at the same time as The Genius of Birds. This one's more of a popular science book, I guess, if you don't want to delve into The Genius of Birds. It's a little bit shorter and does more profiles on individual bird species. The Hittites is a really great book on the Hittites if you want to read about them. Usually they're kind of unknown in ancient Near Eastern studies. Rites of Spring, really abstract, over-the-top arguments. Yeah, not recommended for, it's not really about World War I, it's more about, I don't know, the high culture of during World War I and before and after. It's kind of weird. Last Wish, just, I don't know, The Witcher is just, not my thing, I guess, just a lot of yapping. Anansi Boys was a pretty good story. The storytelling is good, but it was all style no substance, which just isn't my thing. The Poison King, The Life Legend of Mithridates and Rome's Deadliest Enemy. It's a little bit overblown, but it was a really, really fun read and profile at Mithridates. And I think it's one of the only English biographies of Mithridates in print. The Six Gun Tarot was the most over-the-top, weird western I probably will ever read, but it was a lot of fun. The Way of Kings, biggest, underwhelming, or the most underwhelming book of the year by far. I guess I just had my balloon burst with how high my expectations were with that one. The Shadow Throne was the second book in the Shadow Campaigns. Just not quite as good as the first one, though it sets up the third one pretty well, I believe. Ivory Vikings is actually really interesting. It's about ostensibly about the Lewis chess people, which, if you guys don't know, are the chess figures used in Harry Potter and Sorcerer's Stone. Race of Kings is basically dynasty warrior fantasy, if that's your thing. Dark Matter than dinosaurs, without really any dinosaurs. Just really in-depth on, legit, the science of dark matter. really science heavy. The Romance of Tristan is a really good medieval romance if you like medieval romances. Hittite Fortifications, well, basically if you like the Hittites, you want to learn about like the Walls of Troy, that's a pretty cool book to read about. Mythology is probably the magnum opus of basically Greek mythology out there. The Naturalist, if you really enjoy reading about Theodore Roosevelt and his basically conservationist type stuff, this is a good book to look at. When True Night Falls, the second book in the Coldfire trilogy, definitely I think it's the best of the three. Lots of cool stuff happens in this one as well. Dawn and Damnation is just a really fun like fantasy paranormal western. If you like vampires and werewolves in Purgatory West, the West version of Purgatory, go ahead and check that one out. Promise of Blood is good flintlock fantasy, not as good as the second trilogy. Pictish Symbol Stones, very esoteric book if you want to learn about Pictish symbol stones, basically. The Ledger of Sigurd and Gudrun, this just, I don't know, I guess I didn't know what I was supposed to expect from that, but it's like Tolkien's version of the Lay of the Volsungs, but probably just go read the Lay of the Volsungs. Pagans, the first half is a lot better than the second half. The first half is kind of like a vacation travelogue of like just random pagan stuff. That was really cool. The second half, not so much. Trail at Little Gibraltar is a really good examination of a really terrible event that happened in World War One, where American troops were basically betrayed by another American general. Naturalist Goes Fishing, probably the best life science-ish book I read this year. We got conservationism, fishing, and science all mixed together, basically. What the Dog Knows is all about cadaver dogs, working cadaver dogs, so if you want to learn about cadaver dogs, that is the book to go to. Heir of Sea and Fire takes the female protagonist of the Riddlemaster of Head and basically does the same sort of abstract, weird fantasy stuff going on. Shadows Linger was a really good follow-up to the first book of The Black Company. Different plot structure, but you still know it's the same series. Really fun. Aesop's Fables, basically it's Aesop's Fables. If you guys don't know what that is, really good. Just basically Roman animal folk stories. Playing Aces World War I was kind of like just a middle school fun read that I found like at a used bookstore or something. Red Seas Under Red Skies, not quite as good as Lies of Locke but still really good. Really enjoyed that one. If you like pirate rogues, basically. The Eye of the World, I definitely prefer Eye of the World to the Stormlight Archive. At least like the Eye of the World, Robert Jordan just runs with everything. Basically, it's epic fantasy. We're gonna make it epic. The Dark Tide is basically Lord of the Rings 2.0, basically. Age of Charlemagne was just kind of about the Carolingian age, and not really about Charlemagne in particular. Hittites and Their Contemporaries in Asia Minor is just another book on the Hittites. Nothing really super special about that one. Deep Freediving actually was a really fun book if you are interested in people that like to hold their breath for like 20 minutes underwater and try and go to like 1,000 feet under the water and halfway dying / paralyzed. Some people die. If that sounds interesting to you, definitely go check that one out. Pre-Socratic Philosophy, a very short introduction, is actually a really good introduction to pre-Socratic philosophy. Really does a good job on Heraclitus, if I remember correctly. Function of Reason was some weird philosophy book by Alfred North Whitehead. I have no idea what I read, to be honest. The Illustrious Dead, this was a really interesting story about Napoleon's Grand Army that invaded Russia and basically how typhus basically helped spread destruction among his ranks. The Cavalry Lance, if you're interested in Cavalry Lances, it doesn't cover the whole period of lances, just the modern period of cavalry lances, so I was kind of let down a little bit with that, but kind of esoteric with a lot of like boring measurements and stuff like that. Wars of the Ancient Greeks is just a really good overview of ancient Greek warfare, if that sounds interesting to you. In the Wake of the Plague by Norman Cantor is, I guess, like a really weak book by a prominent medieval historian. I guess it was rushed after his death. The Trojan War New History was basically Homeric fan fiction, not really recommended. The Dying Earth was okay, just kind of like really strange vintage fantasy that I kind of like. Soul of an Octopus wasn't like my absolute favorite, but it was still a really good book, and I understand why everyone else basically fawns over it so much. As you can see, I still gave it 5 stars. Sky in the Deep was a YA book that I read this year. Not quite sure why. I mean, it was okay. I don't know. I guess just wasn't anything special. I wanted more like Viking-ish stuff, but it was just kind of YA in Viking Land. Iron Fighting Easter Parklands was just a Nat Geo book. Really good photography, like always. Beowulf is an awesome medieval primary source read that you should just go read. Song for No Man's Land, weird World War I fantasy. I have no idea what was going on half the time. Origins was just kind of a boring Neil deGrasse Tyson book, to be honest. I didn't think there was anything special. Poetics of Aristotle's Meaning and Influence. Pretty much if you're writing a thesis on the Poetics of Aristotle, read this book. If not, don't even worry about it. The Wolf, a really good World War I story about a ship that basically a stealth merchant vessel that's actually a battleship that doesn't even lay into port. The Germans didn't even know where their own ship was for literally almost a year and a half. Rescued was just a really nice little heartwarming book about adopting dogs. It was kind of, all fluff, but still really fun. You're Now Less Dumb. I am definitely dumber for reading this book. It was just like Psych 101 and like a lot of, oh, gotcha, psychology test things. I just was kind of like, yeah. Shadow the Torturer, really excellent, just weird science fantasy. A lot of abstract symbolism, but Gene Wolfe is a absolute wordsmith. Highly recommended if that's your thing. Eyes of the Overworld, basically the same thing as the first book in The Dying Earth, except you follow just one character in the short story collection. Packing for Mars, it was excellent comedic nonfiction. Highly recommend. Mary Roach. Universe from Nothing, I can't really remember. I remember it was kind of some argument against religion with, I can't remember exactly, but it was just kind of a really boring science book, I guess. I didn't have great luck with science books, primarily this year, or last year. How I Killed Pluto actually was a really fun astronomy book. It's kind of like a memoir of how basically his Mike Brown's basically discovery of extrasolar planets beyond Pluto, and basically how the International Astronomical Union basically voted to kill Pluto afterwards. Joan of Arc, history is just kind of like a boring standard biography of Joan of Arc. Just wasn't anything special. Crown of Shadows is the finale to the Coldfire trilogy. It's still a really good book, not quite as good as the second one, though the ending just throws you for a loop. It's just a bunch of crazy stuff happening there. Alright, Poetics of Aristotle. Highly recommended if you like studying drama and stuff, or if you like a lot of plays, things like that. That's a good one to look at. It holds down true even today. Gilgamesh is just a really fun story from the ancient Near East, and one of the oldest works of literature in the world. Elmeric was really bad science fiction by Robert E. Howard. Dead Indian Wars is the sequel to Dawn and Damnation. Definitely an improvement over the first one. And just like I said, highly recommended if you like paranormal creatures in Wild West Purgatory. Atlas of a Lost World Travels in Ice Age America was just a really fun, basically travelogue of basically going through the time periods of the last ice age in North America and what was going on with the different creatures and different peoples and stuff. Life in a Medieval City, basically, is research material for George R. R. Martin. So if you want to learn where he got some of his knowledge from to make his world and Westeros, read this book and the other ones, which is Life in a Medieval Village and Medieval Castle. Reason for Flowers. If you want to know anything about flowers, I bet you it is in this book, whether that's how they grow, what you do with them, how you eat them, how you sell them on the stock market. It is all in there. Okay, the Crimson Campaign. Basically, you have the best strategist ever act like a total knucklehead the entire time. What Byzantium was college lecture stuff. Basically, if you want to learn about Byzantium, that's a really good place to start as a great overview. The Vikings from Odin to Christ, the best book I've read on Viking conversion or Viking assimilation to other religions and cultures. Highly recommended if that's what you want to learn about with the Vikings. How to Be a Good Creature was an excellent memoir. Really short, but really hard-hitting. Even with that cute cover right there. Aristotle's Children doesn't have much really to do with Aristotle, and mostly was just kind of a boring medieval philosophy book, though it was good on what it did cover. Plants, a very short introduction, is kind of an abstract look at plants, not just different plant varieties, but how plants are classified and then basically conservation status of plants around the world. British Redcoat is just sort of a standard book on basically British redcoats, as you can tell. Half the World is the second book in the Shattered Sea stuff. Just a really terrible romance going on in that one. I hope, like, not all YA books have, like, sad romances like that. Hadrian and the Triumph of Rome, a pretty standard work on Hadrian, though there's not too many of those around. Kind of avoids the issue of Hadrian's Wall, though, kind of glosses over that. The Names of the Stars, Life in the Wild, just a memoir about a guy who lives in, like, the mountains for a month. Though apparently he did that for like a much hardcore way in like the dead of winter in the mountains like 20 years earlier. So, yeah. The Greek ideal and its survival was just kind of nice. Basically, the Greeks are cool. Basically, from the 60s. The Book of the Moon is actually a really, really good astronomy book, I found. Basically, if you want to learn anything about the moon, both culturally or, like, you know, the physical science of the moon, definitely read this book. Wildcat, really good historical fantasy almost, between basically Celts and Romans, except in a fantasy world. Gallipoli 1915, a good overview of Gallipoli. I wish they'd spent a little bit more time on the naval aspect beforehand. The White Rose, probably my favorite book of the three books of the Black Company I've read so far. Just really, like, strange, grimdark, bleak environments going on in this one. Like I said, like talking menhirs and sentient trees and beasts and stuff in the desert. Just really cool. The Truth About Animals, Stone Sloths, Lovelorn Hippos, and Other Tales from the Wild Side of Wildlife. Just a really fun comedic non-fiction. Spallanzini, if you guys want to learn about like some crazy, if you guys can't handle like animal abuse, definitely don't read that. Even though it takes place in like the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s and stuff like that, definitely don't read that. But it is, I don't like that part's not funny, but the whole it is a really funny book overall. Really good dry humor and quirky humor as well. Gunpowder Treason and Plot was kind of like a middle school historical fiction-ish on Guy Fawkes is trying to blow up Parliament, basically. And I wasn't exact. I thought it was just kind of going to be like a history book on that topic, but it was okay for what it was. North Pole and Culture. It's kind of an abstract look at the North Pole with one of the most esoteric and eccentric chapters I've read like all year about like globe makers in like the 15th, 16th century that made globes that you could like buy and put together and stuff. And it was just really the most abstract chapter like I've ever read. 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain. Really good books showing exactly why you should read to your newborns and how they should hear about 30 million words by the time they're 3 or 4. Complete Chronicles of Conan is all the original Robert E. Howard stuff. Really good, highly recommended if you like anything remotely Conan. Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, best dinosaur book I've ever read. Just really good. It definitely hit the spot if you're itching for a dinosaur book. The Hobbit, not really much to say, just excellent storytelling right there. Barons of the Sea, really good about the mid-1800s and how clipper ship helped make America a dominant player on international trades, things like that. An Introduction to Greek Philosophy is probably even though I know it's like a college class lecture thing from the Great Courses, best introduction, as you know the title suggests, to Greek philosophy I've found so far. Fashion in the Middle Ages is a very esoteric, very particular book on fashion in like the last quarter of like the 1400s, something like that. Not really recommended unless you're like hardcore into like dress in the Middle Ages. Versailles, just kind of a standard history, though it was just really well done over the palace at Versailles, from its beginnings as like some weird hunting lodge to literally the modern period. Revolution for Dummies by Bassem Youssef is basically the Jon Stewart of Egypt during the Egyptian Revolution stuff, and it's basically his story of making that show and then having to basically flee the country. Walls, I was really looking forward to this one. It was just really boring and had some kind of dumb arguments about pretty much if you're civilized, you're soft, you know, but you know, that's totally like really not true. Race Me in a Lobster Suit, Race Me in a Lobster Suit was just really fun. It's all fluff, and basically a woman put out fake ads on things like Craigslist and stuff to do really crazy things, such as racing in lobster suits with seaweed in your apartment and everything. Radium Girls was a really sad story about women in the early 1900s who painted with radium, like things like watches and military instruments and stuff, and basically how they all basically got radioactive poisoning and cancer and things. and basically their fight for justice in like the courts and stuff. Really well documented, and is like a sad story, but really important to read about. A Little History of Philosophy is actually a really fun little history of philosophy, basically. And that covers all philosophy from like the ancient, or at least Western philosophy from the Greeks to like the modern day. In Search of the Canary Tree was a really cool like look at basically environmentalism, though the author sometimes inserts herself a little bit too much into sort of the how the work is presented. The Stowaway is all about Paul Gravonsky's basically journey to Antarctica by stowing away on a ship like 3 or 4 times in a row. Fishing Through the Apocalypse sounded like really insane, but basically it's Matthew Miller. How do I want to say that? Like exploring ways that fishing is going to change in basically the modern age, and how it's not necessarily going to be the apocalypse if you like fishing. Potato is just like a cool abstract look at potatoes, and I live with, like around potato fields literally, so that's why I picked that one up. And just, if you want to learn about your favorite starch, definitely read that book. Dragon Behind the Glass, a really cool exploration for arowana fish, basically the the dark underground of illegal fishing, fish trading. That's what you want to read about. Children of Hurin is grimdark Tolkien, highly recommended. And that's it. Wow, there's all the books I read in 2018, all together with like really quick reviews. Tell me what you guys think about something like this. I literally did not want to get like all these books out and try and like do a video that way, so I just used the Goodreads. Tell me if you guys mind the screen, basically the screenshot type thing going on. And if you have any other recommendations for like doing videos with using like my Goodreads shelves, anything like that, I'll be glad to consider it and talk to you guys about it, and try to come up with some more unique things, I guess, for my channel. So anyways, tell me what you guys think about your these books. Tell me what your favorite books from 2018 were, maybe like the top 3 or 4. Give me some more recommendations for things that you noticed that I liked, based on like the ratings and stuff on here, and the things I didn't like. Just tell me what you guys think. I hope 2019 is a great reading year for you, and you find some new favorite books to remember back on in later years. And always remember, whatever you end up reading, read victoriously.